Welcome to our weekly podcast, Life Along the Merrimack. And my guest today is Moss Quinlan, who is a veteran of the Merrimack River in many ways. He was born in Lowell, near the river. He spent his career, going to river areas in Maine because he worked with paper companies. And Moss Quinlan, thank you very much for being here.
My pleasure, Dyke. Thanks for having me.
Yep. And so we have on the screen, for those watching, we have a Coast Guard motif, but we're mostly going to be talking about the river. Now, there's a strong connection because the Coast Guard was founded on the Merrimack River in 1790. But Moss, I wanted to ask you a couple questions about growing up on the Merrimack River. You grew up in Lowell, and maybe you can talk about what the river was like in the 50s or 60s. My understanding, it was quite dirty. Is that the case?
That was the case. Giving Lowell's location downriver from Manchester, New Hampshire, Concord, New Hampshire, Nashua, New Hampshire, a lot of outflow of untreated sewage, plus a lot of the mills, part of the manufacturing process would discharge impurities, whether they be dyes from textile making or other impurities. So by the time it reached the mouth of the Merrimack in its journey to the Atlantic Ocean, it had become quite contaminated. And as a child, we're told not to go in the river.
There were a couple. Boats, we're talking about the 50s and 60s. Were there boats on the river at the time? Were there rowboats? Fishing boats?
No fishing boats per se that I can remember. I do remember there was a boat club, and it was not a yacht club. It was definitely a boat club, a power boat club on the river. And these fellows would, I think, make their own boats to an extent or tune the engines. And you could hear them on weekends just screaming up and down the river. At the time, there was no harbor patrol and no type of police jurisdiction. So they're fun to watch as a kid because we could walk from the house down to the river and sit on the riverbank and just watch these impromptu races. I suppose you'd call them drag races. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of fun to watch. But no, occasionally you'd see people fishing, but you weren't about to eat what you caught. That's for sure.
As a kid, I had a friend who grew up on the river, and his parents told him, don't go near the river, and if you somehow fall, run home and we'll put you in the bathtub. Did kids swim in the river, or did they stay away from the river? Or
we
I don't know exactly how.
Yeah, we were definitely told that it was dangerous. The current ran pretty strong where we were living, right near the Pawtucket Falls. And, by part of putting the fear of God in the child was a parent saying, you'll be swept over those falls. And I remember going to a grocery store. We'd cross over the Pawtucket Bridge with my mother. We'd walk to a grocery store, and you'd look down and see the rapids, going over the falls there and the rocks at the bottom. So it was definitely a visual warning. And it was somewhat, I won't say traumatizing, but it definitely got the message across.
Well, one of the city councilors in Newburyport, Charlie Tantar, you might know the name, he was telling me that in the early 70s, he was on the crew team for Georgetown University, and they came up to Lowell, Lowell, to have a crew competition. He and his partner fell in, the kayak capsized, and they were rushed right to the hospital. They couldn't even complete the race because people were so concerned. So I guess Charlie Tantar's anecdote bears your concern out that the river was considered quite dirty at that time.
That's for sure. And I think, Dyke, your work with John McCone and what he's done, his Merrimack River Watershed Council,
yes,
I may have that wrong, but to clean up the river and, vast strides in the last 50 years. And it's amazing because I do swim in the river now. But back in the day when I first moved to Newburyport, that was a no-no also.
Yes. Talk a little about your career, Moss, because one of the things I've always been interested in is you've seen a lot of rivers in New England. As I understand it, you were a representative of some paper companies in Maine and New Hampshire. So what was your position for much of your career? And, how did the rivers play out up in Maine and New Hampshire? They got a little cleaner also.
Yes, they did. I guess you go back to the root source. The reason these rivers became so important to paper making was, particularly in Maine and northern New Hampshire, was the source of wood, which then became pulp, then became paper, and also water power. It was a large part of what the mills needed early on when they didn't have hydroelectric power, when they were using strictly water power for the process. A ready, cheap, available supply of water, and then also the raw materials, the wood that went into the paper. And over the years, working with representing various paper mills, the trend was, I guess, a much more enlightened view, looking for a renewable resource rather than clear cutting, which occurred a lot in the South, but not so much in New England, clear cutting forests and not reforesting, not replanting. That went away, I think, once the reality of we're going to run out of wood, even though we've got this vast acreage in Maine and New Hampshire and Canada specifically. And over the years, they developed a better sense of stewardship, I think, of the environment. And I won't say it was totally altruistic. A lot of it was pure self-serving. There's a profit motive behind that. And then over the years, I saw a lot of changes towards the EPA, once that was established, stepping in and taking control over the discharge, because so much... And the discharge from the paper mills, and a lot of them were dyes, harmful chemicals, and in addition to the water, they're polluting the air. And the joke was, and Dyke, you spent a lot of time in your journalistic career in Maine, driving through Portland, and you'd see the smoke coming from the old Warren mill in Westbrook, and you could smell it a mile away. And that seemed to be the case in a lot of the smaller towns where the mill was the chief employer in Maine, like Millinocket, East Millinocket, further up. And the locals didn't complain about it, but they're definitely being polluted, as was the atmosphere. And then over the years, you saw more of an attempt to clean the smoke and clean the water. And most of the mills now, I'd say if not all of them, that are still operating in the United States have to adhere to these restrictions, very stringent restrictions. And what they take out of the water after they've utilized it for their manufacturing process, it goes in cleaner than when it came out. So that itself is a good thing. And of course, more of an attempt at recycling, just using recycled papers has caught on, and also using recycled material in the paper making process as well, repulping used fibers. So
one of the great heroes, Moss, in my opinion, was Senator Edmund Muskie from Maine, who in 1972 was a leader in passing the Clean Water Act. And even today, when I talk to people, they'll say, well, things started getting better in about 72 after the Clean Water Act. But it's my understanding that, as you just said, federal regulations have helped quite a bit in cleaning the paper mills and the textile mills. So I guess Ed Muskie has to be high on the list of heroes if we look back over the last half century.
When you think about it, Maine somewhat being a parochial state compared to some of the others, somewhat rural with the exception of that thin coastline, and you think of the political capital Muskie must have risked to take that step back then with some of the paper companies and their powerful lobbyists.
Well, I was a reporter at the Portland Press Herald in the early 70s, and a lot of the executives of the paper mills, as you say, were furious about this. I mean, they said this is going to ruin our profits. We're going to have to move out of state, which they eventually did anyway, but for different reasons, in my opinion. But,
for sure,
big change. But I think, over the last 50 years or so, things have changed a bit, and Newburyport itself has benefited from that. There are a lot more pleasure boats than there were in the 70s.
Oh, totally. When I moved to Newburyport in the early 70s, it was struggling, not just economically, but the waterfront was it had some fishing boats, it had some commercial boats, and some pleasure boats, but nowhere near what we've got
Yes.
today. The boardwalk didn't exist, the seawall didn't exist. There was some riprap and the like, but as far as any type of destination or where you might find tourists, it was suffering like so many of the towns, and you wouldn't call Newburyport a mill town per se. It did have a few manufacturing entities, but it really thriving. The good days were before the Civil War and the shipbuilding. So, and that too was dependent on the river, as you've so aptly put in your book on the Coast Guard and the River Merrimack.
And another hero on the subject that you just mentioned of clean water is Senator George Mitchell. In 1987, President Ronald Reagan wanted to do away with grants to enable sewage plants to be built. And so Mitchell said, geez, don't, if you're going to do away with the grants, at least give us low interest loans. So since 87, there have been low interest loans, and many of our elected representatives right now are trying to get them, today, because many of the sewage treatment plants are quite old and the water goes into the sewage treatment plant. But as I understand it, Moss, people are still trying to clean the river, and they're working to get these federal low interest loans to improve sewage treatment plants.
Yeah, indeed. And you've seen some of the grassroots efforts, and no puns intended there, but some of the local folks will go out on a Saturday or Sunday with bags and just pick up debris, or there's a group out of, I think, the Lawrence Haverhill area that will actually retrieve motor vehicles that have ended up in the water for one reason or another, along with some heavier metal. And I don't mean that in a chemical sense, but just
and not the music sense either, I trust.
No, man.
Yeah.
But no, it's come a long way. And when reading your books on the Coast Guard and just seeing, back in the day, long before our time, the shipbuilding that put Newburyport on the map, and how important the river was to not just the economy of the Newburyport area, but also it enabled them to produce vessels that, the Coast Guard was at Massachusetts was one of the first vessels that was built here for the Coast Guard.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, Moss, because what we have up on our screen is the Massachusetts. This was the first vessel in the Coast Guard. What happened was George Washington permitted 10 revenue cutters to be created in about 1790 because there was a lot of smuggling. There was a lot of, bogus paperwork that was enabling shippers not to pay enough money to the federal government. So they created revenue cutters. And this we're looking at now is the Massachusetts. It was the first revenue cutter. And for that reason, Newburyport is considered the birthplace of the Coast Guard. This is 60 feet long, Moss. Had crew of 10, and it was very adept at, stopping smuggling. It could maneuver pretty quickly, and it also had some good seamen. Now you've had a boat in your day. Did you ever have a sailboat? Maybe not 60 feet long.
Yes. No, not quite that far, that long. Yes, sailing around Newburyport's a challenge. You don't really sail on the river if you've got a larger sailboat. I know the American Yacht Club, they have a great sailing program for young people using smaller boats. They used to do it with Lightning, and now they've got some smaller Hunters, and it's a great hands-on program for the local children or young people. And they have had some races over the years, but any cruising, any real sailing, you've got to get out through the mouth, and that can be a challenge given the sandbar, the shallow or the shoals at the mouth of the river between the jetties. And even though the Corps of Engineers does dredge it periodically, it still can be a challenge. And the course of the Merrimack changes. If you look at some of the old charts, the old nautical charts, and you'll see how over the centuries, it's really its path or its course has really been altered and changed and comes back. So interesting what man tries to do and what nature does.
You have a power boat now, is that correct, Morris?
Yes, a small power boat.
So do you wait, if you were going to go out on the ocean, would you wait for high tide, or would you not necessarily have to wait for
Not
high
not
tide?
not necessarily with a small boat. Depending on what the channel looks like, you just get 4 feet clearance to get out through the river.
Mhm.
Larger boats might not, deeper draft may not be able to do that. So, and again, it depends on the current and the winds too, and how much boat traffic is there, because other boats, larger boats, particularly some of the party boats, the charter boats and whale watch boats can, even though they're good mariners and they do practice, how should we say, the courtesy to other boaters, just the wakes that occur can capsize a smaller boat. But,
It's true. And if you were taking a trip like this coming summer, where is a good place to go? Would you likely go to Gloucester? Would you go to Portsmouth? Uh, or what are destinations that people would think about going to now?
by water or by land?
By water.
Well, I think it depends on the size of your boat or your vessel, to be more nautical, and how much time you have, and whether you plan to spend the night. A lot of good day trips. A reasonable sized power boat, a sailboat can make it to Portsmouth, and it's a very hospitable port. Gloucester is still more of a working port.
Yes.
Rockport, Marblehead, and Salem. That's a pretty good a day trip, doable. But Cricken, or going over towards Cranes Beach and going up the Essex River, that can be enjoyable, and a little exploring there. And same thing back to the Merrimack River, heading up river towards Haverhill.
Yeah.
It's a nice cruise up through Amesbury and then into Haverhill, Rocks Village.
What is the size of your vessel now, and what is the horsepower?
It's 16 feet with a 60 horse. It's just very small, but it gets us up and down the Plum Island River. It gets us up and down the Merrimack and over towards Ipswich and out into the Atlantic if need be, but not very far. It depends on the weather.
Do you go? Is the Parker River a destination as well? I see a number.
Yes, it is. Yep, we do that, and it's an easy trip from the house, and other than during greenhead season. The biting flies for those who aren't local, and I go up under the bridges and almost out to Route 1, and depending on the tide.
Well, this is Joppa Radio 96.3, and on television it's Comcast TV Channel 9. I'm talking with Moss Quinlan, who is a resident of Newburyport and Newbury, I should say, and from Lowell along the river, is now living on the river. And in terms of changes that you've seen in recent years, also, there more sailboats or more motorboats, or how would you assess the situation of which is prevalent?
I don't have any factual knowledge other than looking around. It seems like a good mix. Power boats definitely outnumber sailboats just because of the flexibility and versatility, and the fact that you've got marinas from Amesbury, actually almost up to Haverhill, coming down into Newburyport, and you've got bridges to deal with. You've got the Rocks Village Bridge to deal with. You've got the chain bridge at the Amesbury Newburyport line to deal with, and then you've got the Gillis Bridge in Newburyport to deal with. So if you've got a mast, and depends how tall your stick is, you've got to play it, or you've got to wait to get the bridge open. Whereas most power boats can clear with a lot less. So, and that's part of it. And you also can get upriver faster with a power boat, still obeying all the rules. But
I think a lot of motorists have found, when the bridge goes up, there are a couple of masts going past. But I must say that the delay is never that long. I've always found it interesting. If I'm at the top of the bridge and I'm there just looking down the river, up the river, it certainly is a beautiful, beautiful area to contemplate.
Agreed. I think most realtors will agree with you.
Yeah, it's certainly been a popular element. And when you're talking about realtors, Moss, and we're talking about residences along the river or down to Plum Island, I suppose the size of the houses on Plum Island have grown over the years, because as they got different sewage solutions. They could build bigger houses. Is that a change that you've seen, that houses are
Oh,
large
definitely.
on the island now?
Definitely. I remember when I first moved to town, Plum Island, predominantly cottages and seasonal cottages. There were some folks that stayed there year round, had winterized their houses, and either had good water from a well and had decent I guess you'd call it cesspool back in the day, or
Yes.
a good septic system, depending on the soil and the like. But by and large, most of the quote camps or cottages were definitely seasonal. And then as time went on, a lot of folks realized that this, Barrier Beach, it was a jewel, it was a gem, and a great place to go. Values were well below market, and folks who lived inland, say, and towards Lowell, Lawrence, Haverhill, would find their way out to the water, similar to Hampton, similar to Salisbury. And but over the years, more and more got winterized, and then with the coming of water and sewer to the island, that really, I think, tipped the balance. And then the larger year-round homes were constructed, and during some of the storms, they received some serious damage with beach erosion and the like. But I guess there's a price to pay for everything.
Well, in the last decade, as you know, 4 to 6 houses have kind of, with the erosion on Plum Island, they have fallen into the Atlantic, or onto the beach at least, but they've been rebuilt. I was driving down there recently, and each of those places on the Newbury end, the southern end, there used to be gaps there where the house had disappeared, but now they've all been rebuilt. So I think the appeal of a good view is still very much in vogue.
Yeah, there's something to be said, living on the water and having an unobstructed view of the Atlantic Ocean and the Atlantic. It's I suppose splendor, glory, and fury.
Now, just on your general knowledge, Moss, and you're looking out the window, because I think you live down near Plummish Downs, kind of near Bob Lobster. Is there much clamming going on these days? Do we still have clamming as a small industry?
Some, not that much, out in the flats, and they've opened up the clam flats closer to the Merrimack, and that was a sure sign that things were a lot better in the river. And periodically, based on certain levels of bacteria, clammers, both the recreational and the commercial, would get their catch or their clams tested out on the island, and not that much. You see, I think, more over in the Rowley area and over towards Ipswich. Some here in Newburyport, but not as much. And I don't know that for a fact. It's from observation. But
well, I must say to listeners, if clams are taken off of Plum Island, of the Plum Island area, they are purified. There's a purification plant out on the island, as Moss had mentioned. So I always wondered about this, but if they're from this area, they're definitely purified, and they're definitely state standard. So keep eating the clams, but they are, to my knowledge, purified if they come from here or many other areas along the coast. So I wanted to just end by saying one of the surprising things to me is that the Merrimack River is still the source of water to close to 500,000 people in this area. So that's another reason to keep it clean. Obviously, it's purified. Obviously, there's science, but 500,000 people still get their drinking water from the Merrimack. So it's, a very vibrant resource in this area. So I want to
very much so.
I was talking to Moss Quinlan today. He has started on the river in Lowell. He is now down at Plummish Downs in Newbury. Moss, thank you very much for talking with us. You have a great knowledge, and perhaps we can talk again this summer.
I was going to say, it wasn't a very long journey, just floating down the river from Lowell to Newburyport, but well worth it, and I've enjoyed it. It's been a good journey.
Yeah, it's been great. And thank you for being on the show. Again, this is Life Along the Merrimack, and I don't know if anyone can see it, but I'll put it up there anyway. This is a book that I've just written, Life Along the Merrimack, it's called. Too bad you can't see it better. At another time, I'll get a PDF or something. Anyway, this is it. Thank you, Moss, and thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll be back next Tuesday at about 2:00. And this is Dyke Hendrickson on Life Along the Merrimack. Thank you very much.